Rob's Country and Seed Force, taking New Zealand agriculture into the future. Welcome to this week's program. We're going to be catching up with some new regulations regarding plastic is concerned, and also we've got a pretty good lineup of guests, including Dennis. Dennis, prickly subject, but gorse.
Is indeed, Rob, and it's one of the imports that our forefathers brought into the country that was most unwelcome.
Well, welcome at the time. They didn't know it was going to become rampant.
No, it's got out of control. But it's quite simple. Gorse is hardened off at this time of the year, so it takes less water or less spray mixture to cover the bushes, and therefore less chemical and less money. Simple.
Which is always good. But
Always
do
good.
it now.
Do it now. Simple.
Okay.
Yep.
Cropping programs.
Yes, cropping farmers really need to think about next year already. They're taking crops off this year, and I would say to them, do not compromise on your rotations. A little bit of flexibility within there, but those rotations work for a reason in terms of diseases, weeds, things in the soil, the correct balance of nutrients in terms of crops that put nutrient back into the soil, ones that take it away. So if you do too much of one thing, you're going to get out of kilter, diseases, problems. So just do not compromise that rotation with a little bit of flexibility in there.
What about contracts? Should you be looking at those already?
Well, in line with that, the cropping rotations, they need to be looking at securing those crops to grow in those fields, and certainly the relationship with the merchant who they're going to grow the crop for is very, very important. Talk to them early. They'll be having meetings sorting out what types of crops they want, how many crops of perennial ryegrass, for instance, how many of annual ryegrass, clovers, things like that, and wheat need to get in and think about what you're going to do in planting autumn wheat. So do talk to those merchants, and of course those merchants will only be interested in the farmers who have perhaps irrigation for some crops, not necessarily for all crops, but for irrigation, and those farmers who do perform and do take notice of what the merchants ask them to do. So that's very important.
Those who listen.
Those who listen and those who ask questions are the ones that the merchants like to work with.
Exactly. Can we talk about the ownership of seed or grain when it actually changes hands?
Well, it's quite a vital and cloudy area, Rob. Certainly from the point of view of insurance cover on seed and grain, just who's got it covered up to a certain point, whether it's covered anywhere in New Zealand or when it's covered up until the time it leaves your farm, or what about the ownership and things like clovers and grasses. The legal ownership probably only changes into the merchant's hands once that seed has been dressed and tested, and it passes the test. There'll be a point in the contract where legal ownership transfers, and farmers may think, if they've delivered it to the seed store, that it belongs to the merchant. But it might belong to the farmer. In fact, in most cases it does belong to the farmer until it is tested to show that it is up to the specifications of the contract. Then legal ownership will transfer. So from the point of view of insurance and ownership, check your contract, and if you're in doubt, ask your merchant where it all fits in, or your insurance broker.
I was going to say, I think you should also ring Harmons, quite frankly, and get someone to look at the contract.
Indeed,
yeah.
Indeed.
This year's harvest, how's it gone, or going?
Mixed bag, Rob. We've come down on the back of two very, very good years, and we've got a little bit complacent about where we think our yields are and should be. Generally, yields are back. Quality's back a little bit in the grain side of things, and regardless of how much irrigation, how many sprays, how well you've set the crop up, what you've done, Mother Nature prevails, and she's given farmers a pretty rough passage through from the beginning of the major rain event right through to managing those crops to the harvest period, and they've taken a little bit of a back step, and peas would be one area in particular that the yields are down. So You have to work with Mother Nature, but you can't beat her.
No, exactly. Nutrient levels.
Yes, well, the government's setting some bottom lines, or set some bottom lines for nutrient runoff and also water quality, which is very good to see some parameters placed out there. And farmers need to be very careful about what they do with nutrients in terms of balancing the crop's requirements with what's available from the soil. So that's important that we don't over-fertilise where the crop can't utilise it, or whether there's sufficient from the soil. So doing those tests, soil tests, to get the balance right. In terms of trying to stop nutrient runoff from the property, direct drilling has probably got quite a major role to play in the future, and certainly fertiliser in the ground rather than spread on top of the ground. Also, winter fallows and fallowing crops, that ploughed fields that have stormwater running off them, not a good look, and areas that we'll really have to concentrate on and do some more work in the future.
Dennis, thank you very much indeed. After the break, we'll be talking legal issues with Harmans. Welcome back to the program. I want to talk to you, Deirdre, about wills, because there's some minefields in there, isn't there?
Yeah, particularly around life events that you might not think that your will is an important thing to plan into, things like weddings or separations. For example, if you have a will already and then you get married, as soon as you say I do, your will is cancelled. Unless you specifically say in your will, this will is made in contemplation of my marriage to the person you're about to marry. So
that makes it null and void.
That's right. As soon as you actually go through the ceremony, any will you have previously is cancelled, and so you therefore have no will. So if something was to happen on the honeymoon, for example, you would die without a will. Similarly, when you separate, your will does not cancel when you separate, and neither does it cancel when you formally divorce. But once you formally divorce and get the decree from the court, then any mention of the spouse in your will is cancelled out. So the rest of the will is fine, but the bit about the spouse is cancelled out. But if you just separate and life goes on, and you never formally get through the divorce side of things, but you might get a new partner or life carries on, if you were then to die, then your will that you had still names the former spouse as a beneficiary, and your current spouse would have a claim under your will as well. So you might end up with two spouses duking it out for your assets.
That would put a cat amongst the pigeons.
I'm sure they wouldn't be thrilled to have anything to do with each other.
Exactly, really. Yeah. So what happens if somebody dies? If you become a widower or a widow and you've got a will, it's pointless, is it? Or what happens? Do you have to do a new one?
It's always a good idea to review it. Oftentimes people who are married spouses particularly their will might say, I leave everything to my spouse, but if they die before me, then I leave it all to the children. So and when the first spouse dies, then the will, you just jump down to the next bit that says I leave it to the children. So you don't have to change it. It's still perfectly fine as it is. But if you leave everything to the spouse, and perhaps at the time you made the will you didn't have children, so you didn't make any provision to step down to children, then you definitely want to review it then.
You just mentioned the word step, and that opens up as in stepchildren. You've got half brothers. You've got people who came in with the new model. Really gods, little fishes.
Exactly, yeah. And a lot of people think, particularly if they've got stepchildren, that they came into their lives when they're very little, and so they've grown up and they consider them my children. They think, I've raised this child, I think of it as mine, but they've never legally adopted them, for example. If in your will you just say, I leave my estate to such of my children, then that means your blood children or your legally adopted children. It does not mean stepchildren. So they would end up missing out. If they were little children at the time you died and were financially dependent on you, then under the law they may have a claim against your estate as dependents, even though they're not blood children. But if they're grown-ups by the time you pass away and were never your blood or legally adopted children, then they would have no claim against your estate.
So to get around that, you name them. If they haven't been adopted, you can name them.
That's right. Instead of just saying I leave it to my children, you say I leave it to my children, and for the avoidance of doubt I specifically include you know, Jack and Mary and Jane, who may not be my blood children.
That's a nice way of putting it, and just to eliminate the doubt.
Yeah, exactly.
So as long as they're named, they're okay.
As long as they're named, it's just as you can name anyone to be a beneficiary of your will. They don't have to be a family or blood member of your family. You can name anybody, but as long as they're specifically named and identified in a way that there can be no doubt that it's that particular person and nobody else in the universe that it might be.
I remember the case where a farming chap left everything to his 2 sheepdogs and all hell broke loose.
yeah, it's not unheard of.
No,
yeah.
it's not. And I think that sort of set up a whole lot of new things.
Yeah.
Can you literally write a child out of your will without them having some sort of follow-on?
No, you can't. I mean, you can leave them out of the will, but that doesn't stop them having the right to claim against the will. You can't contract out of their right to claim under the Family Protection Act. The law expects that you will consider your legal and moral obligations to spouse, children and grandchildren. Those are the people that have a right to a specific direct right to claim against your will. If you leave any of them out for any reason, then they have a right to claim. It doesn't necessarily mean they'll receive a full share. They'll most likely be found in their favour for some portion of your estate, but they won't necessarily get the equal share for those ones that you've left in. There may be other factors. They may be estranged. They may be very financially independent all on their own, and the people you've left your will to might be less so, and so the court would take that into consideration. But just by cutting a child out of your will by not naming them doesn't take away their right.
Often,
exactly. Yeah.
Because, Deirdre, we do have the situation where, until very recently anyway, I used to hear stories of farmers saying, look, the daughters are okay, they're married, it's up to their husbands. Now, I'll look after my boys.
Yeah, and we find that still such a lot, particularly and almost always with the farming families. You know, they don't want to split the farm up so that the son gets the farm and the daughters get the cash assets, which often by the time dad passes away, the cash assets are pretty minor because all the money is in the land. So you get one person that ends up with much more. So there's often a lot of dispute and unhappiness amongst family members, particularly the girls end up with very little. Sometimes they're completely on board with it, but yeah, it is difficult.
Yeah, the other thing, of course, is that you've got their spouses who are leaning on them and saying, well, hang on, how come your brother's got the farm and we've got it? And we've got nothing. It's
often what I find when I'm dealing with families, it's the specific beneficiaries are not so bad, they get on well enough, but it's the next circle of people around them, the spouses and the friends and the guy down the pub who knows somebody who did something a bit similar, and you know, they're winkling in their ear and telling them they should be getting more or doing more, and that's when we start getting more issues.
Deirdre, thank you very much indeed. Thanks, it's a minefield, as we said. There are new regulations about plastic, so I caught up with Chris from the people who recycle it, and it's business as usual for them.
That's right, Rob. The 1st of January has been a landmark day here in Canterbury that the burning of agricultural plastics is now banned. It's been a while coming in. I know you and I have had this conversation for about the last 3 years, but so it's finally here now. And yeah, so farmers are going to be a bit more restricted on how they can dispose of plastic. But the key thing, Rob, is it's okay banning something, but you know, it's either got to be enforced and we've got to provide farmers with a sustainable long-term solution to the problem. And that's what we at Plasback are aiming to do.
Before we get on to that, this is likely to spread throughout the whole country, though.
Yes, it will do, yeah. Agricultural waste, the whole issue of agricultural non-natural waste on farms has risen up the agenda, both for regional and local authorities and for the Ministry of the Environment. And yeah, it is going to get more widespread around New Zealand, and there's a number of different councils and local authorities that are looking very closely at these product stewardship schemes that are out there for farmers.
Okay, tell me a bit about you guys. You haven't been around. Well, you have been around for a while, actually. I was going to say not for long, but you have been.
Yes, yeah. Well, we're now in year 8, and the scheme has grown every year since we first started it in 2006. We collected a measly 10 tonnes through the whole country of principally silage film. That silage film is the most visible waste stream, and that's the one people want collected. Last year we did just under 900 tonnes. And the scheme, since it started, has collected over 3,000 tonnes of waste plastic, which otherwise would have been burnt or buried. So it is gaining acceptance by farmers, but we need to keep the growth going, and we want to see more and more farmers using the service that's available to them.
It's not just wrap, it's everything plastic?
Yeah, no, we want to provide farmers with a one-stop shop. We know that they have a number of different plastics on their farms, whether it's polypropylene bags, twines, drums, big drums, little drums, you name it. There's a lot of plastics there. And so when we go on a farm, we don't want to just pick up our plastic, we want to pick up any plastic that's available. And the system we have allows farmers to segregate waste at source, keep it a lot cleaner, and we have it in bags, so it's a lot easier for us to go and pick it up. And if it's easier, it means it's cheaper.
There is a slight charge, obviously.
Yes, there is a charge. There's always going to be a charge somehow, because we're working out there in those big rural areas with the trucks running around, so inevitably there's got to be a charge, and whether it's hidden or whether it's up front. So we want to have just an upfront charge so that farmers know what they're paying. Now, the collection charge is $40 per bag from your farm. It's not a big cost. And I would also tell you, Rob, that we started at $40 in 2006. It's still $40. And the way I can keep that price at $40 is by having more farmers take part, so that when we're running around, we're collecting from more farms, so it becomes more efficient.
And it's subsidised, I guess, by the fact that you do sell it at the other end.
Yes, we do. So what we do sell the plastic, but the money we get for selling the plastic covers our baling costs and our shipping costs. And to be honest, we use some of it to cover up a few stuff-ups that we have around the place, which are inevitable.
So how does it work? It's picked up from the farm and comes into here?
Yeah, it gets picked up from the farm and it goes to our 2 purpose-built balers, which are designed to handle the big bags. Now, these are quite big bags. They can hold up to 250, 300 kilos worth of plastic. So they all get baled up together. So we get about 6 of the big bags into one bale. So we've got a nice transportable product that people want. So, but we have to present it in a way that it's easy to handle.
Well, obviously, yeah. Now, I'm a wee bit confused because you've got Plasback on your shirt and you've got AgPack up on the wall. How does that all work?
Right. Okay. Plasback is a brand and it belongs to AgPack. And what Plasback is a product stewardship scheme. Okay. So the government has introduced a new law. Well, it was introduced back in 2008. And it did a number of things. The most important thing really is this notion of product stewardship, which is basically getting producers to take responsibility for their products once they become waste. And it's not just agricultural plastics, it's every product that's out on the market. I've just come back from a conference in the States where there was a very interesting Canadian speaker, and the Canadians are actually leaders in product stewardship scheme. And they were saying virtually everything that you buy in your supermarket store is covered by some product stewardship scheme, and even down to your till receipt. It's part of a product stewardship scheme somewhere, and there's a huge cost behind all that, and that is the future. People have to take responsibility for their products once they become waste.
And you're halfway down that track, if not 3/4 already.
Well, we are, and we've been leaders in it as well. So Plasback was the first scheme to be accredited by the ministry for agriculture, and it was a joint second scheme for the whole country to be accredited for any scheme across all sorts of different ways. So we're pretty proud of that.
Is it fair to say that you're really probably the only man in the field at the moment?
We are now for agricultural silage plastics. Our competitor has exited the market, so we're the only people now that do the on-farm collection of silage films. But as I said, we also want to give farmers the opportunity to get rid of a whole lot of other plastics that they've got.
Because we are getting, and I hasten to say that I don't want to use the word green necessarily, but we are getting more conscious, aren't we?
Yes, the whole industry is becoming more sustainable, and they have to be. And farmers are under a huge amount of pressure at the moment to to address all these issues, but we can't dump everything on them all at once. So silage film, plastic film collections is, pretty low. There's other more important things they're doing, and they're doing that well. But the issue is coming up the agenda, and the way to keep the cost down is if we can get these guys to come on board voluntarily. We don't want to see any mandatory schemes put in place because they're just costly to introduce.
And you are nationwide?
Nationwide, from top of the country to the bottom, and so it's a very easy scheme to access. We've got about 18 collectors all around the country servicing their own areas, and all the information's in your rural store. They come through the Plasvac website. There's a whole different way that farmers can interact with us, and we'll be down at the South Island Field Days in Waimumu, so please come along and talk to us there.
And as we said, for them, thankfully, it's business as usual. Do you think that debt servicing is going to go up 20%?
I do. Indeed I do. I don't think that there's going to be much doubt about that, Rob. We have touched upon it before, but by way of example, if you're on 5% now and by the end of the year you're up to 6%, that's 20%. Just like that.
That's the arithmetic.
Yeah. And worse than that, of course, is the pain that follows on from that, because a 20% increase in your debt servicing cost is huge.
So who's at risk?
Well, that's a very good question. The rates are likely to go up from as early as next month, 13th of March, but I suspect they'll go up gradually. If you haven't fixed already, then you should have. We've been warning. As to who's at risk, anyone who's on a tight cash flow now, anyone where the bank has been asking them questions about their policies or their future strategies, they're at risk. That's the bank paving the way. If you've been transferred inside the banking system to a different department, perhaps with some innocuous name like Rural Solutions Department, then you're definitely at risk. You're on their bad list.
Rural Solutions?
Well, that's just an example. Each bank has its own...
It sounds very much as though you're over there, we are going to be coming and seeing you.
Well, I think that's the issue. I can see, given the way that the debt has been piled on in the last couple of years, I can see some insolvencies, some liquidations, and some sadness.
So what do you do? I mean, what if somebody who's sitting there at the moment, probably starting to perspire, what do they do?
Number one, you've got to get help right now.
Who from?
Well, Rob, to me, there's three obvious things. You've got to get some strategic help. I'd be turning to a farm management consultant for that. You've got to get some financial help, and obviously your chartered accountant is the place to go for that. And I believe that the biggest thing of all, though, is to face up to it and go get some psychological help, because it seems to me that if you're in that position, you've made some bad decisions anyway. Just taking on too much risk wasn't the best decision you could make. And you're going to be under pressure. The pressure may be subtle, but it's there. And so if you're under pressure and you're under coercion from the bank, you're going to make more bad decisions. So, for example, doing nothing is probably about the worst decision you could make.
Neville, a lot of people will be sitting there and feeling desperate because they're saying, we've got cash coming in, we've got cash going out, I can't increase the cash coming in, so how can I match the money going out? And to me, that's a solution where there is no solution, or situation where there's no solution.
That, I think, is unfortunately going to be the case in some circumstances, which is why I can foresee some insolvencies, liquidations, receiverships, that sort of situation, because the equation just doesn't work. And we need to keep in mind that we're talking about farming, we're talking about a business that's high risk anyway, inherently in the nature of the business. It is one of the higher risk things you can be in. And we're vulnerable to cash exchange rate movements, we're vulnerable to commodity price movements, we're vulnerable to the weather. You compound all of those things, and then you get what for a lot of farmers is your greatest individual cost, debt servicing, going up by a significant amount.
20%.
It's going to be, for some, I'm sorry to say, the straw that breaks the camel's back.
So they contact their accountant, farm advisor and banker perhaps, and say,
that's going to be an essential move, but I'm more concerned for the farmer than for the bank. So I do think that the farmer needs a support person. I might be being a bit extreme in a lot of cases by talking in terms of a psychologist, but you sure as heck need a mentor or a support person if you're going to be in this situation.
Neville, thank you very much indeed. It's very, very scary times, but thank you. Interestingly enough, after the break, I'm going to be talking to Dr. John O'Malley, literally about things such as stress and what happens inside the body. Welcome back to Rob's Country. Bit of an intro for you, isn't it, really, as a chiropractor kinesiologist who handles stress and gets people through it?
You'd think that what Neville was saying would be me rubbing my hands with glee, because you'd think that'd be bringing them in. But you know, the real issue with people when they're under stress is they in fact tend to hunker down, you know, and as a consequence, in fact, they run the risk of it building to the point of breaking. And when he talked about the straw that breaks the camel's back, stress, funnily enough, at a physiological level can be the straw that breaks the camel's back, literally. You know, a lot of people think of, you know, they go, oh, well, it was when I moved those bales of hay, or I chopped that wood, or I got whacked in the knee by that ram. None of those can necessarily be pleasant things, but they build up and they build up and they build up, and then you come in and you have the cheerful news from the Reserve Bank that the OCR is going up by 0.25, and you think, oh no, what does that mean to me? $1 million, $2,500, is it, or is that $25,000? No, $2,500. It's a lot. 1% is 10,000. So you know, it's a real pressure on people, and so you know. Planning for stress is always a good move, but then also recognising it's essential, because what Neville talked about there isn't so much that people are going to be stressed. It's more about how stressed are they going to be. They're farmers. They're stressed anyway. It's in the nature of the beast. We will always find people will buy land and get onto a farm, always at the margins of the economy of doing so, because farming isn't a business, it's a lifestyle. You've got to run it like a business to survive it, but you do it because it's a lifestyle. And so my experience has been no matter how much land goes up, people will always buy land.
They'll find the money.
They'll find the money to the absolute edge of their capacity, so they're always sitting there on the knife edge. It's a lifestyle.
He talked about talking to people, communicating.
I think that, you know, certainly professional help is something people should always consider, and I recommend people, you know, in my case, I think people should come in at least every 3 months and get a tune-up and get all the little accumulated injuries removed so that you can cope better with these pressures and stresses. And that support could be from your alternative healthcare practitioner like me, your GP. Generally they tend to go more pharmacological. Counsellors certainly can be very useful people, but you probably want a rural counsellor, someone who can link the two together.
Rural support, for example.
Well, good one to use. But those capacities and things like federated farmers. You know, look at your local support groups that already exist, like your federated farmers group and your supplier groups that exist. Your own. Look at your neighbours, and at the same time be cognizant of your neighbour. You might think, you know, you're doing okay because you got rid of your debt a while back and you haven't loaded up. You took that gamble early in the piece and
you got away with it.
And you were lucky. You know. A lot of people go, I was clever.
No, you were just lucky, buddy.
You know, if you bought money, if you bought a lot of money in the early 80s, right, you were heading into one of the worst maelstorms that we were going to face in economic terms. You know, when interest rates got up to the 20s. You know.
22, 23.
Oh,
yeah.
I mean, you know, it doesn't matter how much of a genius you are. If you've got a lot of debt out there, you're dead. So think of your neighbour, and if you find that people have become withdrawn, they're not talking, they're a bit more grumpy, right? Rather than move away from them, move in close to them. So what's going on?
Is it as simple, John, as ringing next door neighbour and saying, hey, listen, come over for dinner. Yeah. I've got a roast on.
I think that's a great idea. And if they go, oh, no, you listen, we haven't touched base, you know, it's a good idea that we catch up. Rob, I'll say it and I'll say it and I'll say it again. We are fundamentally tribal, right? And what was the ultimate penalty in the tribe? Exclusion. They kick them out. Short of death, it's the only thing that is really, really dangerous, because in the tribal situation on the savannah plain where we evolved, if you're out there alone, you're lion tucker. So whether you're isolated because of your circumstances...
You don't have to talk about the money, you don't talk about their debt or anything, you just get them in and say, listen, here's a scotch and we'll have wine with dinner.
Yeah, and the first part of any part of getting into those real issues is setting the environment where they say, I'm going through some pretty tough times.
And admit it. John, thank you very much indeed. After the break, we'll be talking about water, and still to come, we're looking at a harvest and federated farmers. Welcome back to Rob's Country. South Island Field Days, absolutely brilliant. What you're saying.
Yeah, the Southern Field Days, I spent the week down there last week, a couple of days setting up a site, and then Wednesday, Thursday, Friday at the Southern Field Days. Absolutely amazing. It's wonderful to see how a volunteer organisation, not the young farmers, and can put together such a fantastic event. Averaged about a bit over 15,000 people a day through the gates. Total of 38,500 people were there. Since the last, they alternate with the Lincoln Field Days at Waimumu. Since we were last there in 2012, they've built an enormous shed. I don't know what the dimensions of the thing are, probably 100 metres long and 50, 60, 80 metres wide. You could play rugby inside it. It's huge, yeah. Had 180...
They get the stadiums down there, you know.
Had 180 exhibitors inside the shed. Yeah, extremely well run. Nearly 800 exhibitors on site. Massive, yep.
And there was a lot of interest. I mean, it's all very well to be there, but...
Yeah, oh, yes, yeah, we've come back with probably a month and a half's worth of work just to follow up on. So, and most people that we spoke to that were in the same position. You know, despite the fact that Thursday turned on a near winter day, and it turned the site into a bit of a sludge pond. And sorted out the men from the boys, so to speak, for those people that came dressed and attired for the weather. But even on a day when the southwesterly was smashing in and the rain was coming in sort of semi-horizontally, and the Southlanders were still there in their shorts and gumboots.
They feel no pain, Andy.
There were still 15,000 people there, so absolutely outstanding.
Tony, on the program today, we've been looking at some pretty sort of negative things that are happening, but this makes it look all positive for a lot of people.
Yeah, I came away with a really positive feeling from down there. I mean, the farmers were out in force. They were looking for new technologies, new ideas, new ways of improving their operation. We spent a lot of effort in Southland looking at improving effluent irrigation on the dairy farms and setting up red and green zones for them to go, or not to go, which went across well with the farmers there. And we had lots of interest, and you know, they're looking at that technology to be able to give them the ability to comply with their consent conditions.
Because that's now becoming vital, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yep. They've got to be able to demonstrate compliance, and if they can demonstrate compliance, then they get the tick and they get left alone, more or less. Yeah, it's the recidivant offenders that get regular visits.
Yeah, exactly. Let's talk about watering in the autumn.
Yeah, you know, you don't have to be a blind observer here, but if you look at the last 3 or 4 weeks, particularly probably the last 2 weeks, we've got into a pretty warm pattern. We're getting a lot of blue sky days. Admittedly, our solar radiation inputs are going, they're on the wane, but we're getting relatively high temperatures. Listening to Phil Duncan, I think it was on the radio, talking about what they're expecting into the autumn, and they're expecting an El Nino to kick into the autumn, which means that we could be in for some westerly weather. We'll get dry weather on the east coast, and people need to be very conscious of the fact that anything they want to take into the winter with really good cover and with things ready to give them some winter feed and winter growth, they need to be very, very conscious of how they irrigate in the autumn from now on. And that doesn't mean go out there and flood the place, but it means to be very conscious of the fact that I'm going to have to irrigate in the autumn this year. It doesn't look like we're going to get a lot of rain. Probably pour down with rain tomorrow now, but it doesn't look like we're going to get those large rainfall events that will get us through a week or 10 days at a time. We're going to have to be very conscious of what we do in the autumn.
Tony, thank you very much indeed. Well, speaking of this time of year, I caught up with Warwick Green from Seed Force and asked his view on what the harvest has been like.
Well, it's been a bit of a challenging one, Rob. I mean, I'm standing out here today, and probably the first day in Norwest that we've had for, by golly, I reckon since Jolly Christmas. We go through the harvest today. Early ryegrass, probably a bit disappointing, to be honest. Yields have been a bit disappointing. A lot of light seed. Dressing losses are probably higher than normal. So quite a lot of farmers, it's only a mediocre harvest for the early grass. The later grass seems to be a lot better, seems to be better yielding, which has been the reverse of what it has been in a number of other years. I mean, previous years it's been the early grass that's done jolly well and the late one that's struggled. So, yep, just an interesting season. Probably too early for cereals. Winter barley, that hasn't gone too bad. Early barley crops have been reasonably okay. Really, the wheat harvest, we're standing in a new paddock of wheat here. This is a new variety, Torch. But this is, probably planted early April. It's been sitting here for about 3 weeks or so, and I've been champing at the bit. But today's probably the day we're going to get it with a bit of luck.
Just hasn't been dry enough.
Humidity's been too high. It's been cloudy, and we haven't been able to get it down enough. The only alternative would have been to artificially dry, and that's a cost that really I don't think many farmers would want to take on board. We've just got to get our dear friendly northwest wind to blow a little bit more.
I mean, it's either an electricity bill or it's patience, and patience is a lot cheaper, isn't it?
Well, that's just the way of the world. I mean, the wheat looks, the odd crop that has been done, yields are not what they were in the previous 2 years, so we're back down 1 or 2 tonne to the hectare. So previous years, like feed wheat that's been doing 12 tonne to the hectare is probably sitting more like around about 10. But the quality seems to be okay, so that's good.
Tell me about Torch. I mean, what's happened to this paddock? It looks pretty clean. There's not
well, this is a new variety. It comes out of RAGT.
Out of what?
Out of RAGT, the breeder. So it's part of their worldwide program. This is the first variety that we've selected that's come through our evaluation in New Zealand. We've sub-licensed the variety, so a local company in Ashburton, Kate's Grain and Seed, are the license holders for this variety. And this is really the first year of any commercial seed that this. So it's based on UK data. It is the highest yielding variety that you can get over there and has performed extremely well. So we've got to wait and see how it goes here. But I mean, in the trials that have been done to date, it looks pretty jolly promising.
So you'll be growing this for seed, or is it going to go for milk?
This one here is for feed evaluation, so this one's not a seed paddock, no. But there are other farmers growing it for seed, yes. Yep. And I mean, there are a lot of good varieties, but I think if you're growing feed wheat, the key thing is you've got to actually drive yield. You've got to look for maximising yield, because that's what basically makes your gross margin. So in a feed wheat, you've got to be doing 10, 12 or higher tonnes to the hectare. As a seed crop, last year, this crop did 15 tonne to the hectare. This variety did 15 tonne to the hectare.
You'd be happy with that?
pretty jolly good. Mm.
And as far as the future is concerned, I mean, is this going to be one of the...
The problem with wheat varieties is that the churn or the replacement is quite rapid. So 3 to 5 years maximum is all you ever get out of a new variety, because the breeders are forever challenging themselves to breed something that's higher yielding or better disease. So, and you will get some varieties that break down with disease and rust and those sort of things over time. So, you know, we'll probably see this variety around for 4 or 5 years. Yeah, absolutely.
Is it quite resistant to disease?
It's pretty good, although in the UK it has been susceptible to a bit of stripe rust, to yellow rust. We haven't seen it out here in New Zealand, so it must be a different race. So, you know, we'll get a few years without worrying about that, and you know, we'll probably be on to the next one, Rob.
I tell you what, with the rain they've had in the UK, everything will be subject to rust, I would have thought. After the break, we're going to be talking dairying and federated farmers. Welcome back to Rob's Country. For new regulations or openings or whatever regarding share milkers and the holding back of premiums from... What's all that about?
The share milking, our variable order share milking agreement and the 50-50 share milkers agreement, the herd owning share milkers agreement, we've removed the provision for the owner to withhold payments. There was provision for the farm owner to hold up to 75% of their payments due to the share milker.
If there was a disagreement?
Yeah, if there was a dispute or there was damages and they suspect they weren't able to be able to pay. Unfortunately, that has been abused a bit by some parties. In the worst case scenario, there was one guy further north who had withheld but did not put into a trust, because if you had withheld the 75%, you needed to put it into a trust fund. He did not. He broke the law in a few different ways, and he ended up actually having a term of imprisonment and is currently out on appeal. So that wasn't, by having that provision in there, has caused a lot of grief. There are other ways of doing it, and at the end of the day, you know, a share milker and owner, you need to work together, and it should be an agreement where it's win-win or lose-lose. So it was a bit draconian. It was something that it didn't need to be there anymore. There's plenty of opportunities for...
You guys are working closely on getting rid of all this draconian stuff, aren't you? And sort of making it win-win.
Oh, we have a section of the Share Milkers Association for feds and the dairy farm owners. We put them together and get what's pragmatic. You know, it's all well and good having something that seems very great and glossy and glam, but it needs to be plain English and it needs to be pragmatic, and that's what we're trying, what we have done, and have just going through the final stages of completing another a revision of that.
Brilliant. You must be pretty chuffed about payouts because they're looking pretty solid.
Oh, it's a fantastic time to be a dairy farmer. In fact, you know, look, it's fantastic for New Zealand and the community. I know I've got a couple extra dollars and it'll go into a bit more R&M. There's a few things that need to be replaced around the property, and of course provision a bit more extra for tax. So, hey, great time for the country as well.
Way back in the program, we were talking with the accountant, and sort of saying that interest rates going up. So there'll be quite a bit of debt restructuring and reduction going on.
Yeah, you need to be very, very astute in where you provision this extra income. It better not go on a new boat and car.
Exactly, that's what I was aiming at, Ward.
Yeah, the idea of putting income equalisation could be well worthwhile looking at, as well as other opportunities, or even just putting it aside and in the bank for taxation. There is, on the other side of things, the interest rates go up, it'll probably mean the OCR goes up, which dollar will go up, which means their prices will come down. So, look, it's a great payout.
Exactly. I'm not going to go into any negatives on it.
Make hay while the sun's shining, and it's shining right now, but it won't last forever. So,
exactly.
While we enjoy today, we should also provision for tomorrow.
Yeah, I love the way you say car and boat. It actually goes into debt restructuring and equalisation. And
there's many ways of doing it, and it's up to the individual. But make hay while the sun shines.
Listen to Uncle Vaughan and to Uncle Neville.
Yeah.
Land and water, how are you getting on with that? Because that's a pretty dicey subject as well on a lot of occasions.
Yeah, Salwahora gets announced on Saturday, and it's a big subject for people to get their head around. It is going to change the game. The game has changed, it's already out. It won't be, you won't compare your production very soon on how many kilograms of milk solids you make per hectare. It'll be how many kilograms of milk solids per kg of nitrogen leached. So,
really,
we'll have to get to that point. Yeah, we're going to have to evolve.
Okay.
What's been announced right now, the grandparenting means that things basically put a peg in the ground, and in the short term we won't see. There will still be a few conversions go ahead, those who have had their consents granted already. However, in the short term, things will come to a halt, and it'll allow things, more information to come to light. We at Whenua Farmers are not keen on the idea of the grandparenting, as you would have heard in the last few weeks, nor allocation. And as you would have heard from Linda and Michael, we prefer the matrix good management and its derivative. So we're working on it, and we're putting up a good fight and challenging a few things that aren't pragmatic. There's perhaps I shouldn't go into it, but that's a new challenge. And
it's a nationwide one too. I mean, it's the whole industry.
Yeah,
isn't it?
and it's global. You know, look, our consumers, they want this. They want to be buying products from clean, green producers. So it gives us the opportunity to suddenly, rather than be the price takers of the past, we could evolve ourselves into becoming the Gucci or the Rolls Royce of dairy products, and that's what we need to become, so that we can cream that the premium.
So really, they're not the enemy. They're actually opening the doors for you guys.
Depends which way you want to look at it. It's half full or half empty, the glass.
It is. This is what I'm saying, isn't it? So
I think we've got to look. It's going to happen, but you can either be a pessimist or a pragmatist. So.
That's it. Well, I reckon we go with them, because that's the way of the future. Vaughan, thank you very much indeed. Federated Farmers phone numbers and others you'll want to jot down on your screen now. I'm Rob Cope-Williams. You've either been watching or you've just missed Rob's Country, but I will be back at the same time next week. Until then, bye now. Seed Force. If it's not in a green bag, it's not a Seed Force seed.